dozens massacred in Myanmar. The military is accused of another mass killing as the UN calls for an investigation, saying it's horrified by the incident. But will international condemnation change the reality on the ground? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmakers, Myanmar's ongoing violence. Despite the tight control of information in Myanmar, over the weekend, a grim picture began to emerge that at least 35 people, including women and children, had been brutally killed. Photos taken by the Karenni human rights group showed bodies on the backs of trucks burnt beyond recognition. The group says they were internally displaced people killed by soldiers in Moso village in the conflict-torn Kayah state along the border with Thailand. Myanmar's military government has not commented on the allegations, but state media reports that the army had shot and killed, quote, terrorists with weapons from opposition armed forces in the village. Well, the international charity Save the Children says 2 of its staff are missing after they were caught up in that incident. Their vehicle was among several attacked and burned. In a statement, the group says the aid workers had been traveling home after carrying out humanitarian work in the region, adding that they have now had to suspend their operations.
This is a devastating incident for all of us. Our staff in Myanmar are dedicated humanitarians, supporting millions of children in need across the country.
Following the incident, the National Unity Government in exile urged the international community to act immediately and decisively to end what they called the military junta's escalating war crimes and crimes against humanity. The attack also prompted the United Nations and several Western governments, including the United States, to issue statements condemning serious human rights violations committed by the military across the country. The UN has called for an investigation.
I am horrified by reports of an attack against civilians in Kayah State, Myanmar, on 24th December. 2 humanitarian workers of Save the Children remain missing, having been caught up in the violence. Their private vehicle was attacked and burned. I call upon the authorities to immediately commence a thorough and transparent investigation into the incident so that perpetrators can be swiftly brought to justice.
We are appalled by this barbaric attack in Kayah State that killed at least 35 civilians, including women and children. We will continue to press for accountability for the perpetrators of the ongoing campaign of violence against the people of Burma.
But the history of violence in Myanmar raises serious questions about whether these calls will actually be heeded and whether they'll prevent future atrocities. Now, killings have been committed against ethnic minorities in Myanmar for decades. The International Criminal Court has been investigating Myanmar for crimes against humanity, and Aung San Suu Kyi, the once persecuted Nobel Peace Laureate, had defended her country at The Hague against allegations of genocide as a result of the army's campaign against the Rohingya, which she oversaw as state counselor. But in February this year, she and her government were ousted from power in a military coup. Aung San Suu Kyi now faces the prospect of life in prison. According to a local monitoring group, more than 1,300 people have been killed in a crackdown by the security forces. Several groups have taken up arms to fight the military regime, organized by the government in exile under the umbrella of the People's Defense Force. One of these groups is the Karenni Nationalities Defense Force, formed by the ethnic Karenni people. They say the Christmas Eve massacre was directed at them and carried out by Myanmar's military. The Karenni have also long sought autonomy from the central government. They fought for an independent Karenni state from the 1950s until a ceasefire in 2012. Minority rights group International reports that local communities have been subjected to forced labor, sexual violence, extrajudicial killings, and land confiscation by the military. The Karenni people are from Kayah State and form part of the larger Karen group, which, according to data from the year 2000, makes up about 1/10 of the population, although their numbers have dwindled since then. The Burman or Bamar are the largest ethnicity and account for more than half the population. Officially, there are 135 different groups in Myanmar, and it's argued that the failure to address their various concerns lies at the heart of the nation's problems. Well, joining me now to discuss the violence in Myanmar and the role the international community can play in stopping it is Maung Zarni in London. He's an advisor to Genocide Watch and a research fellow at the Genocide Documentation Center. From Frankfurt, we have activist San Lwin. He is the co-founder of the Free Rohingya Coalition. And from Perth, Australia, Htwe Thein. She is an associate professor at Curtin University's Business School, specializing in Myanmar's development and democratic transition. Thanks all so much for being with us. San Lwin, let me start with you. We know groups of civilians around the country, at their wits' end, have turned to civil defense groups, or People's Defense Forces, as they're now called. So, in the case of this latest massacre, is it the junta cracking down on those forces, killing their families and children as well, or is this a terrorist separatist group, as the junta describes it?
Well, what is happening in Myanmar is nothing new for me. As a Rohingya activist, we have experienced the large scale of this violence against the Rohingya people in the past, in 2016, 2017. So the people, unlike the Rohingya, we didn't have the resistance because our situation and the majority of the people in Myanmar, their situation are completely different. We were under oppression for the more than 40 years. We can even move from the one place to another. But my fellow Burmese across the country, they have more chance. So international community is failing again and again because the
okay, but can I ask you what I'm just referring first of all to this recent massacre and what actually lies behind it. The government is trying to argue, the military junta rather, is trying to argue that they had reason to attack because these are armed separatists, that they really don't have much to do with the protests and the uprising against the military coup that robbed them of their democratic government. Which side are we seeing right now with this latest massacre?
Well, they are not the separatist terrorists as described by the junta. They are the resistant force that trying to take down the military dictatorship in Myanmar. So the massacre recently happened in the Karenni state is, almost affected by this civilian, the children, elderly people, women were brutally burned alive and killed by the military junta, not those forces.
Okay.
Whenever the junta had the fight with the ethnic minority, they always target the innocent civilian.
Okay, Maung Zarni, if these are indeed, People's Defense Forces that have risen up because of the military coup, you had said that the people need to take action because the military won't listen to protests. And now we're seeing them take action and we're seeing massacres as a result. Is that what you'd envision?
Yes, I think, perhaps the most accurate descriptor of the type of regime we have in Myanmar or Burma is nothing less than a fascist or Nazi type regime that occupied much of Europe in the 1930s and early 40s, or the much of Southeast Asia and Far East by the Japanese fascists. And so I think it is very important that we get the analysis right. That we to get the analysis right, you've got to take the view of the people, multi-ethnic and interfaith communities across the country, how they view the military today and how they experience life under this military. They view the military as nothing short of an alien fascist occupier. We have a multi-ethnic the political state, a modern state that came into existence after the Second World War. And we are in a situation that is far worse than the former Yugoslavia during the breakup. I say this because in the case of former Yugoslavia, at least Serbian armed forces and Serbian people stick together, although they were committing atrocities across the the Yugoslavia during the breakup. At the moment in Burma, the Burmese national military has morphed into this alien occupying force committing atrocities against all ethnic and religious communities, since February coup.
Right. So, I mean, that now you have said that these PDFs should rise up, that this is the only action they can take because the military is not going to stop. So is that to say that we should expect more of this violence, of these massacres, of this devastating military action that the junta will continue to take until they quash all opposition?
Yes. The Burmese public has protested very peacefully, not just this coup. In the previous waves of chronic military coups and different military regimes over the last almost 60 years, since 1962. This isn't anything new. The oppression, the massacres, the genocide, they're all institutionalized. What is new is that the glue between the ethnic dominant majority that had in the past close ranks with the ethnically Burmese controlled national military and the armed forces has come completely off. So we have a military that has absolutely no support, no legitimacy, no popularity from even the dominant Burmese ethnic society, not to mention the national minorities that have been subjected to repression over the last almost 70 years since independence.
Do these PDFs, these forces now that are coming out of both ethnic minorities and the ethnic majority, we don't know how widespread they are. We can't give actual numbers of how many people have really taken up arms or are at least sympathizing and rallying with these groups. But do they feel they really are the only hope at this point to bring the previous government?
They do feel that in the absence of any meaningful support, international intervention, not simply military, but financial, diplomatic, and others, they have no one else to turn to. The Burmese stopped using the word responsibility to protect. That was one of the buzzwords, the cries of the Burmese to get the UN to take any meaningful and effective action to stop to reverse the coup and to stop the violence by the military. And we've got international fact-finding mission commissioners and the UN special investigators who are openly calling to get the military designated as a terrorist group, albeit it has the Air Force. That this is the only terrorist organization in the world with the Air Force.
Okay. Professor Thein, let me turn to you then. Where does all of this leave the international community?
Well, this has shown once again that international community's effectiveness and also, their interest, the strategies that they've taken hasn't been working. So this all points to ASEAN, actually. So the international community has supported, stayed behind ASEAN, where Myanmar coup case is concerned, and ASEAN has failed initially. But recently, ASEAN's refusal to invite the senior general Maung Zarni to ASEAN summit, I think that has really, I believe, shaken the military, and it has, it taken their legitimacy away. So I think that sort of, alienation, pressure, stronger concerted pressure that we need to see to solve this situation.
Let me ask you about that, because that was very encouraging for the Myanmarese people to see ASEAN take that position when they have always had this very clear non-interventionist policy. The problem after that, though, was that the Cambodian leadership, who's set to take over the leadership of ASEAN in 2022, decided to say, hey, I think we should actually be talking to the generals in Myanmar. So it's not very clear if ASEAN is actually going to stick with this surprising line that they had taken by not inviting Myanmar to their big meeting. Are you scared that even ASEAN might not come through in the way you'd hoped?
I'm a little bit more hopeful than that. I think ASEAN's there is also a division, a split in their views. So the Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, they do now starting to isolate Myanmar. Intending to have a stronger stance against the generals. So I think that's one hope that we have is that ASEAN will start to put more pressure, and also China. Don't forget also, the role of China and China.
I was going to actually ask you about that because many have said that the UN is really powerless, and the only player who could influence the junta would be China, who others argue is not necessarily interested at all in changing the status quo in Myanmar. But do you have some faith that China may take a better position on this?
Look, China doesn't want very destabilized Myanmar. Okay, so China will not want Myanmar to be too destabilized because it has economic interest. So they wouldn't have perhaps minded the coup finished, the coup happened, the coup is normalized. But now it has shown that the generals can't control their country and their economic interest has been threatened. So China is, I would say, might change their mind, perhaps, to protect their economic interest and step in.
Okay.
But that needs strategies to persuade China, to convince China to back the opposition.
I'm glad you have faith. It's actually the first time I've heard that kind of optimism, especially when discussing China's potential role and not wanting to see further destabilization of Myanmar and its own business interests at stake here. Let me ask San Lwin if you agree there. Do you have faith that China would take a more positive role in what the Myanmarese civilians want to see? Because out of China's own interest, it doesn't want to see its businesses and its economics interest in Myanmar destabilized so badly.
Well, this is not the first time coup in Myanmar. This is the third time since 1962. Only 5 years, from 2015 to 2020, the civilian government ruled the country. So, in the past, from 1988 to the 2010, so the junta was under sanction by the Western country, US, UK, and all the European Union. And they survived because of the support by the China. So China has they have the business interest. They are not interested in what the people are suffering. China, they themselves, they are committing the gravest of crime, genocide against the Uyghur people. So they are the same region, they support each other. I'm not sure, they will consider the suffering of the more than 54 million people in the country.
Okay, what really are you expecting from the international community now? Words of condemnation are one thing. You were saying before how sanctions just haven't worked. What are you expecting them to do in light of this latest massacre? And ideally, what kind of steps do you want to see them take?
Well, first of all, they have to block all the corporate industry. The junta is receiving the fund, at least 1.5 billion from the corporate industry like the Total Energy, Chevron, and the POSCO. This oil industry are very much important. So the international community, especially all the Western countries, they have to impose the toughest sanction against all this industry. This is the first of all they have to do. And also they have to block all the the arms supply from the various country, like we have the neighboring country, uh, uh, India, Pakistan. They all are dealing with this junta. Even not openly from the behind of the cutting, they are dealing. So, and even if we ask, that the responsibility to protect from the UN, this is not going to happen. That China and the Russia always will block, and the UN is always, they will keep issue the statement. Today also they issued a statement in regard to this massacre. They said, they identify the perpetrator, which is like, maybe like that the children are asking who is the perpetrator. They know that this military junta are like a terrorist organization. They are the same perpetrator.
Okay.
Perpetrator the gravest crime. And the most another one important is to designate this the military junta as a terrorist entity. This is what the people of Myanmar are asking. And they can also consider for the diplomatic sanction, like downgrading the diplomatic tie,
Right.
expelling the junta ambassador. Yeah.
Maung Zarni, I wanted to ask you first of all about what you were just hearing about the corporations and the line that they could take to have an impact on the military junta. And also, you had spoken at length before about the military junta not getting representation at the United Nations that it has applied for. Where do you see that going? Do you think at least the UN will take a stance on that and not allow at any point in the near future the military to come represent the country at the UN?
Well, the United Nations Credential Committee decided to continue to seat the Burmese ambassador appointed by the former the now ousted democratic, government of Aung San Suu Kyi, and conversely, it has rejected the military's attempt to represent the country at the UN, and so it speaks volume. And so it comes on the heel of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations taking a radical departure from its founding principle of non-interference in the sovereign affairs. Obviously, that what is happening in Burma, ASEAN leaders recognize by their action of excluding Maung Zarni, the terrorist-in-chief, from the summits. What is happening in Burma is no longer covered under this notion of sovereignty. It is no longer internal affair, having a spillover impact in terms of refugee flows, IDPs, and whatnot. But in terms of the cutting off the flow, financial flow, we have to remember Burmese economy relies very heavily, or I should say the state income, the revenues are dependent very much on natural resource extractive industry, particularly natural gas and minerals and whatnot. And these the flow of these petrodollars or natural gas dollars is not necessarily in the hands of China or ASEAN. In fact, it's in the hands of the Americans and the French, and the Total Oil and the Chevron Oil. Even if only two Western corporations are forced by legislation in France and United States to turn off the tap of financing the military, that will take a serious bite. And then secondly, the Burmese professor mentioned about ASEAN being split. Malaysia and Singapore have billions of dollars worth of investment in Burma, and then both countries want to see a more the benign, even semi-democratic type of government. They should put their money where their mouth is. Singapore and Malaysia should freeze the Burmese state's assets like the Joe Biden did with $1 billion.
Let me ask Professor Thein if you think those kinds of moves on the businesses that are invested heavily in Myanmar would have impact, or how much can the military regime actually just turn to the black market and secure their income at least that way?
Yes, the black market it's very big, and you're right. Jade and all that they can turn to. But the extractive industry's income, the income stream, the financial lifeline to the military is also very, very significant. As just now Zarni has said, that depends on the two corporations and the government, I suppose. That again, I would say, the fact that they haven't sanctioned these companies and they haven't sanctioned the MOGI, Ministry of Oil and Gas, is all because of, again, their consideration of China. Because, if these companies, Western companies, if they do leave, then, the question is, we know that who is going to replace that vacuum left by Western exiting companies, and very likely to be Chinese companies. And that's their concern. So,
Okay.
it's geopolitics.
Professor Thein.
Can I just jump in here very
Maung
quickly?
Zarni, so unfortunately, we are out of time. My apologies for this edition of the Newsmakers, but I'm sure we'll be discussing this even more at length in the very near future. So I'd like to thank all three of my panelists really so much for being with us and sharing their insights and opinions. That is all for this edition. Thanks for watching. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter at @the_Newsmakers, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.